Hi, I'm Ashley Hammond.
And I'm Locke Hammond.
We're married.
We run a business together.
And we homeschool our 4 kids.
That makes us sound a little crazy.
I think people might think we're a little crazy.
Well, through all that crazy, we're here to help you blaze your own trail through a world designed for conformity.
And break the chains holding you back from living an uncommon life.
This is Trailblazers and Chainbreakers. All right, we're talking relationship. I was thinking about this the other day, and if I could send advice back to myself in a time machine, one of the core kind of pieces of advice that I would offer after over a decade of marriage is that it's not about adding more things, but it's about letting go of things. I think I get stuck in the trap of reading all of these books, coming across all these good ideas and trying to add more and more and more and more things in to get our relationship to a better place. But I think some of the most impactful things that we've done in our relationship have been actually taking things out, specifically like attitudes, like things that we've let go of. So that's the idea for today. We're going to go through a number of things that we needed to let go of to, survive. Is that safe to say?
Yeah.
Make it this far?
I think it's funny what you just said too, because I think that implies to a lot of things in life with parenting, with health, with everything. Like less is better most of the time.
Yeah.
I think we add all these things or do all these things, read all these books, like you said, and try to apply more when that's actually can be more harmful. And less is, in my opinion, through lots of research and just lots of failing, less has always been better.
Yeah. Well, there's so many good things that I come across, whether it's books or on Instagram or podcasts, or we were just talking about podcasts before we started recording. There's good stuff out there. And obviously we're not saying don't consume content, whatever form that is. But I think it's important to remember what you just said, yes, less is better. And we already know so much of what we need to do to be successful, whether it's parenting, relationship, career, life, whatever. And I know for me, at least, I'll speak for me, it's so easy to get sucked into let me read this book on how to get better. And then that feels like I'm actually getting better. But in reality, I'm not doing anything. It's not helping me unless I implement it. So if you really are going to read a book, listen to a podcast, whatever it is, and implement that stuff, that's great. I would say remove some things to make room for that as well. But let's not go down that rabbit hole. Let's talk about this. Relationships, marriage. What do we need to let go of? I'll start us off. I'll give you one. This, I think, was important for both of us, but I will openly admit was a bigger issue for me. And that is the need to be right. I needed to let go of the need to be right. I've spent my childhood growing up one of 3 boys in a family where, whether it was in my head or not, I kind of valued myself in relationship to the rest of the family on how often I could be right. And so carrying that into our relationship, into our marriage, was definitely not helpful. And I had to ask myself a number of times before this got through into my head, is my goal a loving relationship, a healthy marriage, or is it to just prove myself right? Because I think there were a lot of times we got in arguments where it was just sheer stubbornness. I need to be right, and that's all I'm worried about.
Yeah. And you can win any fight. I always told you could be a politician because you could win any fight. I had that too for different reasons. Mine was more feeling not smart enough and needing childhood stuff, right? All comes from childhood stuff.
Yeah.
Feeling not smart enough, and I needed to fight to be seen kind of thing, to feel validated through being good enough and smart enough.
Yeah.
So it was I felt backed in a corner and fighting the same fight to be right, but for different reasons, more to feel hey, I'm not dumb. I am lovable.
Yeah.
Kind of fighting for my space to be seen.
I was thinking about this one, put it in a different context. I forget where we were, but I was watching somebody with their young kid, maybe 2 or 3 years old. And it was one of those moments where the young kid was just like, I don't even remember what they were talking about, but made like a just kind of a ridiculous statement. And anyone with any kind of life experience would have known that that statement wasn't true. But watching the dad with the kid was kind of like, oh yeah, you think so? Instead of like, no, the grass is not purple, grass is green, or whatever it was. That 2 or 3-year-old child got this kind of, I love you more than I need to be right attitude from the dad. And I was admiring that, but also thinking, well, what's the difference between that and you? Like, yeah, you're not 2 or 3 years old, but we are, if you look at why the 2 or 3-year-old is saying that, it could be a number of reasons. It could be a perception issue. It could be a experience thing. It could be they're just being silly. They want attention. They don't really know, like all kinds of things. All of these things are also true about us in a relationship.
Yeah.
And so if the loving father is going to give that young child like, oh, okay, well, like, I know you're wrong. I don't need to tell you that I know you're wrong. I don't need to call you out. I don't need to correct you. Why can't we do that for each other? Like, yes, there are times where like, oh, you said this and it was really rude. And you say, oh, I never said that. Maybe there are times where you need to prove yourself right. But I don't see why we can't extend that same kind of grace, is the best word that I can think of, to each other. If it's not a big, like, end of the world issue, why not give each other that kind of grace?
Agreed.
One of the things, so I said a question earlier, but another question that was really helpful for me on this one is, I think this came from you, but we heard it somewhere else first. Is this going to matter 5 years from now? And I'm embarrassed about the number of fights that you and I have had that led to us not talking for a number of days, where if we had just kept our mouths shut, if we had not gotten into it with the need to prove ourselves right, it wouldn't have mattered 5 minutes later. Never mind the fact that we weren't talking for probably 5 days. So that idea of, is this going to matter 5 years from now? Is this going to matter 5 days, 5 hours from now, 5 minutes from now? If I just bite my tongue, is this going to matter in even 5 minutes? And like, it seems like such a simple question, but more than I can count number of fights that we've had where we didn't talk for 2, 3, 4 days, just over something stupid.
What's sad is I don't even remember that. Well, I mean, it's sad, but at the same time, it's good because it doesn't happen anymore.
I mean, yeah, it doesn't happen anymore.
But I'm like, I don't even remember that we didn't talk. But with that being said, it's like, I think about even recent fights, which we don't fight that often. But when we do, I think about it like pretty heated, like arguments, or we're really mad at each other. And I think about it like the day after, and I'm like, hey, like, why did we fight yesterday? Like, what was that about? This is like,
that's interesting.
This is saying what you're saying. Like, they're stupid. Like, if you can't remember what you were fighting about, it was such a big deal in the moment. But like the next day, you can't even remember what it was about. Like, hey, why was I really that mad? And what did we even fight about? And what was said? If you can't remember any of that, then really,
yeah.
Like, it goes to show what you're saying is true, though. Like, it's something stupid that you should not have been fighting about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we've worked really hard at this fighting issue. We've talked about this many times, all kinds of different angles to this. When we do get in a disagreement, and we do still get very mad at each other, I'll be honest, like, this is where my mind goes. Once I get it, like, once I have a minute to calm down, I go to this is so stupid. I don't want to go back to where we were X number of years ago, where we, like, two ships passing in the night, like, we just kind of don't make eye contact when we walk in the same room for however long. Like, it used to be days, like, even if it's an hour of us not that stupid, awkward, like, not making eye contact, just huffing and puffing around the house, like, it's not worth it to me.
Yeah.
And that's where not immediately, but once I calm down, that's immediately where my mind goes. And it's like this form of this question, because I hated those days. Like, there was such, like, I wasn't productive. I wasn't nice to the kids. I didn't get anything good done. Like it was such a waste of 2, 3, 4 days. And all we had to do was keep our mouth shut or not need to prove ourselves right. And it's we did an episode, I think, on this quote, which I don't even know who said this, but this quote comes to mind. Some of my greatest accomplishments in life have just been keeping my mouth shut. And I think that's true. It sounds almost insulting. It's not meant insulting. I think that's true. Some of my greatest accomplishments in our relationship have just been shutting up for that 5 to 30 seconds for my brain to come back online and actually function again.
Yeah.
And realize how stupid this is and it's not worth it.
Yeah, because in the moment, it's always deeper, right, than being right. There's an emotional component to it. So in the moment, you should never handle any situation when you're emotional. But also dig deeper. Like if you can step away and ask yourself, like, where is this coming from? Like, why is this making me so angry? Like it's coming from somewhere. It's not what he said or did or what she said or did. It's an emotional component to it. It's coming somewhere deeper, from somewhere deeper. And questioning that and getting curious with why these feelings are arising in you. Like what's going on? I think that is a really good way to like, step away, breathe, and then think about it, write about it, do something about it, and then come back to it. Don't just ignore it. You can come back and be like, hey, I just got really frustrated with you. Yeah. And I realized like it really had nothing to do with you. It was because of like X, Y, or Z that happened. And like I kind of lost it and felt really emotional. It made me feel really like bad or anxious or angry, like whatever it is.
Yep.
I mean, I know that's deeper, but I wanted to acknowledge the fact that it's not usually about being right. It's about something else.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that just came to mind as you're saying that, multiple reasons, multiple trains of thought kind of brought me here, but I'll throw in another thing to put on our list of something I needed to let go. I think this was definitely me and not so much you, but I needed to let go of the need to solve a disagreement right now. Like to me, it was not okay to walk away. It's like, no, we need to figure this out right now. And I, without going down too many rabbit holes on where that comes from my conditioning, from my childhood, from my life experiences, there are some reasons that makes sense, but it's not serving me when, like, if we bring in that quote, like some of my best accomplishments have just been keeping my mouth shut and then no, but I need to solve it now. Well, they don't go together.
Yeah.
Right. And like you said, take a break, walk away, journal, go think, breathe, whatever you need to do. Because if you're at the point of anger, and there are so many times that I did this, and again, it ties right into the need to be right, letting things go, all kinds of things. But I felt like because I thought we needed to solve it now, I then tried to just like pure willpower my way through my anger in the moment to be in a place where I could have a conversation with you. You weren't there. You'd snap at me, and then my willpower would dissolve and I'd start to fight again. Yeah. And it would just spiral out of control. And I've talked to a number of people about this. We've talked about this before. You were always much better at walking away, and I had to learn that skill. But if you're ever in an argument and you try to walk away, now there's a right and a wrong way to walk away, and we can talk about that. But if your partner ever accuses you or gives you shit for trying to walk away, as long as you've done it the right way, you shouldn't feel guilty about it. Okay. And I say that as the one who was accusing you of all kinds of things by walking, oh, you don't care, like blah, blah, whatever excuse it was. I was the one who wasn't okay with you walking away. And now I'm saying like, that was not right. And anybody who like refuses to let you walk away, as long as you're doing it the right way, like that's not conducive to a good relationship. You have to be able to walk away when you think you can't handle it appropriately. And so like the thing I'll say, and I want to get your take on the right way to walk away and the wrong way to walk away is, you can't weaponize it. That would be the wrong way. So you know how much I hate when you walk away. If you get annoyed at me because of something I said, maybe you didn't like what I said, or maybe my tone is starting to cross the line, for you to be like kind of unfairly like, okay, well, that's not what I wanted to hear. I'm going to walk away. You can weaponize it, right? It can be an unfair kind of walk away. But if you really can't handle it, sometimes you've been very good at this. Once we kind of resolve or explained, I explained this to you and you realize this, you have at times been unable to have the conversation, but had the awareness to know that it was going to piss me off. And you'll say something like, hey, I need to take a break. I love you. I'm not leaving, because my mind immediately goes to, okay, this is the end. I'm going to die. She's leaving me and I'm not going to be able to survive, and all of this kind of childhood stuff. When you do it that way, that's absolutely the right way.
Yeah.
And for me to come back and give you shit for that would not be appropriate or fair.
And I always think about with this, you always see these memes on Instagram of like not entering a child's chaos with like your emotional instability. So like when a kid's crying, you coming in hot isn't going to make them stop crying or make them feel safe. Yeah. It's actually going to make it worse. We're really no different than kids, especially if we didn't grow up with emotional stability and intelligence. If you have a partner, and that happens to be me, that's a little bit more emotional and can kind of like shut down and kind of go somewhere else, and then you gotta and we've experienced this, you gotta let them go and you gotta let them be. Because for me, if you come at me and you're emotional and I'm emotional, it's just gonna make me explode and just do and say things that I don't mean. And I'm not using that as an excuse, like, because I've been able to get better at this, but I'm just saying, like, if you're in a relationship where one of you is still very emotional and just shuts down, like coming in hot in the situation is not going to be beneficial for either of you.
Yeah, for sure. I think that understanding the way that your partner works in this sense, like there's ways to, like, if you look at this as an argument to win, there's weaknesses that you can exploit in me, and you have weaknesses that I can exploit. And the flip side of that is, when you know those weaknesses, you can allow your partner to have those weaknesses lovingly, with grace, with love. And what I mean by that is, you know that, like the example I just gave, you know that when you walk away, it's like the deepest trigger for me. I know that when we fight and I pursue you, it's like the worst thing I could possibly do. If I follow you, if I corner you, if I try to have a conversation when you don't want to, like, and those perfectly play against each other, because those are our, like, that's our instinctive reaction when we're stressed. Like, I want to solve it now, and you want to walk away till you're a little bit calmer. So if we see that as a weakness to exploit, obviously that's not the goal. But if we see that as a weakness to love and turn into, we can handle that in a way that it doesn't become a liability.
Yeah.
Right. So the flip side of that is, when you know that you need to walk away, if you're the one to walk away, I'm not going to say if you're the one to walk away, you're the one that has to bring it back up 100% of the time. But if you know that your partner doesn't like when you walk away, they'd rather solve something right now, and you want to have them let you walk away, you have to respect how hard that is for them. And you got to make some effort to make sure that that conversation is had again later. Because what we did was, I tried to solve it in the moment. You refused. We'd get into a big fight. You'd run away. We wouldn't be able to talk about it. I would be really upset about that. I would finally calm myself down. You would finally calm yourself down. And then when it didn't feel so life or death for me, because I knew that following you and chasing that conversation caused so many issues, I used that as an excuse to not bring it back up again, because out of fear that I was going to restart the fight again.
But then that started another fight, because then you would get mad that I never brought it up, but then you never brought it up. So I'd get mad at you for never bringing it up. And then you'd say it was my responsibility, and it was a whole other stupid fight.
Yeah. Exactly. So there's a loving way to handle each other's weaknesses, to turn into them in love, not to turn into them to exploit them. So I think we beat that one up, unless you have anything else you want to add.
I think too, this can be so nitpicky, but it's each situation is different and has their own thing. This is just like general idea. But I think like what you said from the beginning, sometimes things don't need to be rehatched full conversation. Like some things do, some things don't, because
once you calm down, they're not
yeah,
a big deal. Yeah.
sometimes you're like what we said earlier, most of the fights are stupid. So you don't have to like rehash them and have a whole conversation. I think what the bigger thing is like coming back. So I'm the one that runs away, coming back and being like, hey, that got out of hand. This happened. This is how I felt. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry that I did this, or I'm sorry that I said that. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean it. And owning it. I think that sometimes is all it has to be. And when I say all that has to be, I know that saying I'm sorry is really hard for a lot of people. And it isn't, oh, well, that's all. Like it's a
really
big deal.
Easy.
I know it's really hard. It was really hard for me for a long time. So
I also think that sometimes all it needs to be, if we're going to use that phrase, sometimes it can just be like a kiss and an I love you. Like some things, as you start to develop healthy patterns around this stuff and you start to understand each other a little bit better, like if we started to get into it, we were able to stop and walk away. It didn't become a huge thing. And we just needed a little bit of time, and then we come back together and you're good and I'm good. Like it can be as simple as you just giving me a kiss and saying I love you, or vice versa, as like kind of like a, I don't know, peace offering, like just a gesture of like, hey, I'm not going to walk around angry about this. Like, let's get past this.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that you don't ever have to address things, right? But if you take into this idea that like keep your mouth shut until you calm down, a lot of the interactions, the altercations aren't going to be big enough that they even need to be addressed. Sometimes they will. If you're still frustrated about it, yes, absolutely address it. But sometimes an apology isn't even necessary. Don't take that as permission to never apologize, right?
Right.
But sometimes we just need like, you know, like you come in and you put your hand on my shoulder as you walk in the room. And it's just a gesture to me that like, okay, we're good.
It's still a form of acknowledging in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
And love language is touch for you. So that's huge. Like, hey, I see you. I'm going to touch your shoulder. I'm going to give you a kiss. I'm going to tell you I love you.
Yeah.
It meets all of your love languages, actually. Both of them. Yeah.
Okay. Let's move on to another one. You want to?
So a big one for both of us for a really long time, I don't really seem to struggle with this one much anymore, is keeping score. And I struggled with this one a lot. Like a lot. My love language is acts of service. So I think for me, it was like all of the things that I was doing around the house that you weren't doing, I would like tally up, and like taking care of the kids and stuff. It just would make me angry, and it would make me feel like I wasn't loved. Therefore, like I'm going to add up all the times I do all of these things. And in my mind, you do nothing, which was so wrong.
Not helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did it too. And I think everybody does it. It's, how do I want to phrase this? It's almost impossible not to. And I say that carefully because I do not want to justify it, but it's almost impossible not to keep score. It's kind of like, I don't know, maybe it's a more of a masculine thing. I don't think it is. I just don't want to speak for, you can speak for women and tell me if this is a feminine thing too. But coming up through school, boys are constantly ranking themselves, whether it's grades or sports or fitness or like how good looking you think you are, how the girls like you or whatever, popularity. Still, when I walk into a room, it's hard not to be like, okay, that guy's hot shit. He knows what he's doing. Where do I fit in comparison to them? Like I go and play basketball. Every guy that walks into the gym is still doing the same thing. They're like, okay, where do I fit in the hierarchy of skill here? And so it's hard. That's basically keeping score, right? And so it's hard not to. But once you see the destructive ability of this in a relationship, I think it makes it easier to stop. And it's funny that you say you used to walk around keeping track of all the things you do around the house. The natural evolution of that and how I acted because you would express that frustration and you were trying to express it in a way like, hey, this is bothering me. What can we do about it? But it didn't always come out that way. And even if it came out appropriately, I didn't always take it appropriately. So I'll tell you this story. I think I've told this before on the podcast, maybe not. What it took for me to stop keeping score was actually to literally start keeping score. And what I mean by that is I had a guy in a men's group that I was in who shared this like habit tracking app at one point. And it, like the idea was to like turn your habits into a game. So when you check them off your to-do list in the game or in the app, you got points. And then you could use those points for different things. And it's actually kind of brilliant. So many video games harness like the addictive nature of that kind of thing for bad things, but it was actually trying to do some good with it. And so I made a list of all the things around the house that I could do to make you feel loved. And it was very well intentioned, right? I wasn't planning to be like, well, I'm going to track everything I do so that I can just shove this in Ashley's face when she's upset. But what I did was I made a lot of effort to do all of these things. And I was actively tracking it and keeping score. And it did two things. One, it made me feel really childish. Because at one point you were like, I've been doing the dishes a lot lately. And my response was, I can take my phone, among other things, I can take my phone out right now and show you that you've done the dishes twice in the past 3 weeks, in the mornings and at lunchtime. I've gone out of my way to do this. Like, who are you to tell me you feel that way? Kind of attitude. And I didn't like the way that made me feel. But the flip side of that was, as I started to realize I was keeping score, I actually also started keeping track of everything that you did do. And when I felt like I was doing more than you, what I realized was how wrong that actually was. And so to stop keeping score of the things that I was doing and hold them over your head, it was actually really helpful to keep score of all the things that you did around the house and be like, oh shit, I don't know if it was more or less. It doesn't really matter. Like, this is way more than I thought. And look at all of the things that Ashley does that I've been taking for granted. And so that was really helpful for me to stop keeping score, was to realize exactly how destructive it was. So like turning into it actually made me want to turn away from it. And I think really closely connected to the idea of keeping score or stopping the scorekeeping is this phrase of marriage being 50-50. Like, this was a big one for me to wrap my head around. Thinking that marriage is 50-50 was just all kinds of ass backwards. The way I've come to think of it is 50-50 gets you an average marriage, and an average marriage ends in divorce. And obviously that's not what we're here for. So stepping up, getting out of that line of thinking like, oh, I've done my half. Or, I took a step towards her and she didn't take a step towards me. That's all I need to do, right? If we get into a fight, like we were talking earlier, oh, I've made that initial gesture. I gave her a kiss and I said, I love you. And she just kind of mumbled back at me and there's been no change. So fuck it, I'm done. Like, that is not how you get to a good relationship. And we had to learn that. And actually, I came up with a process that works for me on being able to take 100% responsibility. And when we say that, take 100% responsibility for your relationship, I think a lot of people, not everybody, but it's easy for some people to be like, yeah, but I can't take responsibility for other people's actions. Absolutely, that's true. But, and I'll give you some specific examples. I'll kind of walk through this. We kind of actually had this earlier where I had to do this process. Even after a situation where I feel like you, Ashley, are completely out of line, I will try to, and try is the important word because sometimes I don't do this successfully, but I will try to, after a little while calming down, get to the point where I ask myself, and I usually do this in journaling, but where I ask myself, what would it look like if I took 100% accountability for myself in this? So to speak to that hypothetical person's complaint, well, I can't control my husband's actions, or I can't be responsible for what my wife did. No, you can't, but you played a role in it. That doesn't mean, oh, you caused it. It's all your fault. That's not what that means. What it means is like, so let's say like you were being kind of a blankety blank, whatever word we want to use. The responsibility, the accountability is like, okay, well, how did I respond? Did I take the bait from you? Or did I, there's this phrase, declining the invitation to drama. Did I accept the invitation to get into it with you, or did I decline the invitation? I am responsible for my behavior. Did I give you patience and grace in a moment that you might have been having a hard time, or did I just snap at you? Right? Like we kind of had this morning where I got really frustrated. I did not handle a conversation well. And then when I circled back to try again, I started with an apology. I tried to explain what was going on with me, and you were still frustrated. You responded with some anger, and I got all righteous in my own head thinking, well, I apologized and she's still mad at me. What's her problem? And I had to take a minute to sit down and write and say, well, yeah, like I did apologize, but that doesn't magically make it so that she has no right to be angry. Like I did not handle it well in the first place, hence the need to apologize. And I had to let go of that kind of tit for tat, back to keeping score, idea that it's 50-50. So then I had to ask, how can I take 100% responsibility now? Like, what can I put into action now to prevent this next time? And even if I did handle that situation perfectly, which it's never happened, but for the sake of the person who's stuck on this responsibility piece, when their spouse is the one out of line, and I put that in kind of air quotes, let's just pretend you handled it perfectly. Your spouse is completely out of line. You handled it perfectly. There's nothing you could have done any better. If you honestly can't find anything you can take responsibility for, you can still take the responsibility for the relationship and use that last question, that what can I do to prevent this from repeating again next time, to initiate a conversation. Maybe it's drawing a boundary if you really weren't out of line, but like you can get curious about why the other person acted that way. You can do all kinds of things and take responsibility for the relationship overall and improving it next time, even if you did nothing wrong. You can give the other person some grace and patience and understanding and try and get to a point where you understand where they're coming from. So this piece was huge for me. We still screw it up often, blaming each other, but not getting stuck in this 50-50 idea. You have anything you want to add?
I mean, you basically said everything. I think if you're a person who tends to play the victim, which I was for so long, many reasons, I think a lot of people struggle with this. It's easy to point fingers and blame and not trying to take accountability. And this kind of reminds me, like, we have this conversation a lot with one of our kids, like, it's not someone else's fault. Sometimes you just got to own up and take responsibility for the part that you had, like what you said, the part that you had in it, because we all have a part and we also all have a choice. So when it comes to this 100, not 50-50, we all have a choice on how we react and how we show up and what we choose to do in the moment.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important because I've said this 1,000 times and I will continue to say it. I think people, I know people forget that they have a choice. And like, you can stop, you can choose again, you can do things differently. Like, you're not stuck in this pattern, these ways, being a victim, all of these things. Like, it's not somewhere that you're never going to get out of. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an important reminder. You have a choice. You can, just because this is the way that you've done it the past 25 times, or just because this is the way that it was modeled for you, doesn't mean it's the way you have to do it.
Yeah.
And I'll add something onto that if we continue that down its logical line, because the thing that immediately comes to my mind for that is, and I kind of hit on this at the end of that, like, even if you've done nothing wrong, you can take 100% responsibility for your relationship. You can try and repair, you can try and do better next time. One thing that I find myself feeling like, and it's probably not true, but I feel like often I am the one who comes to you first to kind of come back together after we scrap it up a little bit. Now that probably isn't necessarily true, but that's how I feel a lot of times. And it's easy to fall into frustration that I always have to be the one to do it. But that's the trap you're talking about, right? Like, just because I feel like I did it last time doesn't mean I shouldn't do it this time. And so if I resist doing that, I can choose again, right? If I turn away from that coming back together, I can choose again 5 seconds later to say it doesn't matter, because what matters is that we come back together. Or like, hey, get some perspective. You're not that great to live with sometimes too. I'm sure she initiates the repair a lot of times. Give her the benefit of the doubt and go initiate it.
You probably do initiate it more than I do.
Well, that's not even the point right now.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying. You probably do. And I think also acknowledging and not using this as an excuse. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. And you are better at things than me. Like you used to be. I think we're pretty equal now, better at calming down quicker and coming back quicker. And I used to take a really, really long time. I think there's just within the journey, there's going to be one person that's better at things, and it doesn't excuse me not coming back and trying to repair it. It's just saying, if that is the case for now in this season, like not using that against me, or me not using certain things that I'm better at in the marriage against you. This is the whole keeping score things. There's certain things that I'm better at than you, and I can't hold that over your head. I can't be like, well, I do this in our marriage all the time to, make our marriage better, but he doesn't ever. Like, that's feeding the problem, like keeping score in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree that I'm always the one to do this, or he or she doesn't ever, or language. I always, right? Like the always and never, those are dangerous. And also those are times where if you find yourself using those words or that language, it's a good time to remind yourself, like, it doesn't matter if you're taking 100% responsibility for the relationship. It doesn't matter the percentage differential in how many times you initiate the repair, how many times I do it, or how many times I do this or that. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's 100% your responsibility.
And it's interesting too with the partner that it's easier to be the person that repairs. If you come in soft and you repair, it's very interesting how most of the time, I'm not saying all the time, the partner that struggles with that, if it's done in a loving way, will mirror back to you in some way of taking ownership. Like I'm sorry that we had this fight, whatever you say, like, I know that I shouldn't have talked to you that way. And then the partner was angry when you started the conversation, but then you softened it and came in and tried to repair it, where the partner's like, you know what, like, I played a part in that too. Like, I shouldn't have said that, or I know that I was poking you when I did that. And I don't know. I just think it's really interesting how whoever's the one doing it, I don't think it doesn't really matter. I think you should watch the body language and also how things can shift with the other person. Yeah.
I would say, and this is actually a great segue into the next thing on our list, but I would say be careful if that's an expectation.
Yeah.
Be careful saying, oh, well, I initiated the repair. I've done this so many times. I initiated the repair. I took responsibility for my actions. Now it's your turn. Or like being annoyed when your partner doesn't do that. Sometimes they need more time. Sometimes like we don't even know what's going on. But that leads us into the next one on my list, which is, letting go of expectations, like all of the expectations you have. Because like, this is a very common quote, but today's expectations become tomorrow's resentments. And when you have an expectation of a thing, let's just use the example you just said. I apologized, so now it's your turn. And then that doesn't come, like, that's going to become resentment. That is not only not taking 100% responsibility for or accountability for the relationship, but it's bringing in resentment on top of it. You have an expectation of a certain way of behavior. You have an expectation. We talked about keeping score of things around the house. You had an expectation that I should do a certain amount of things around the house. Whether or not I agree with that, which I did agree, doesn't matter, because when it doesn't get met, it turns into resentment. That doesn't help the relationship. And so like the most common kickback or kind of response to this that I'll give you two different common responses. The first is like, yeah, but I deserve that, whatever that expectation is, right? Like here's one that everybody deserves. I deserve kindness when I make a mistake. Yes, you do. But when you have the expectation of kindness, you're actually harming the relationship, because sometimes kindness is not the right answer. Sometimes you need to hold me accountable. I want you to be kind, but there are times where you need to call me out on my shit. Maybe now is one of those times. Or maybe I actually do deserve kindness right now, but you're in a mood. Something happened to you that I don't know about, and you can't give me that kindness. And now, instead of being able to understand where you're coming from in the moment, I get resentful because you're not being kind, right? Everybody does deserve kindness, but the expectation is only creating your resentment, probably your partner's resentment as well. I'll give you one more pushback that I get, and then I want to hear your thoughts on this. This one always, I don't even know how to phrase this. Sometimes people, I feel like, just want to argue. Every time we post a clip or anything about expectations, letting go of expectations, often, like almost inevitably, we'll get some sort of response like, but if I don't have expectations, like they'll just walk all over me. Or if I don't have expectations for my husband, he'll just sit on the couch all day drinking beer, watching football. Expectations are different than standards. With expectations comes the control, the idea that you have some sort of control over the other person. Standards are what you're willing to accept or not, right? So the expectation that your husband will get up and do things off the couch instead of drinking beer and watching football is going to cause resentment for you and him. You definitely deserve your husband getting off the couch, helping you with things. But if you have to force him to do it, you're just going to build resentment for yourself, for him. And it's different than having standards. Like, this is not working for me. Gonna make a change, right? Expectations are not the same as standards. So don't nitpick the word and miss the point. I want to hear what you have to say, though. What do you got around this?
I don't know.
You're smiling at that. So I'm wondering if you have anything to add, or you're just laughing at me.
I don't really have anything. I can see people arguing the whole expectation thing. I know that expectations are always horrible for me. It made me think of a time recently that I came home really annoyed about dishes. And I was like, I don't know why. I'm like, I usually don't mind doing the dishes anymore. And for some reason, I'm really annoyed today, and I don't know why, because I don't mind it. And you said because you set an expectation on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, he's right. Like, I had this expectation in my head that I would come home and there would be no dishes in the sink. And there were a lot, and that made me angry.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't had that expectation and I just came home and there were dishes in the sink, I mean, I wouldn't have loved it. I don't love dishes in the sink, but it wouldn't have been as annoying to me. And it wouldn't have been annoyance at you. But I handled it well. I didn't like get angry at you. I told you, like, I don't know why I'm feeling so frustrated about the dishes, but I am.
Yeah.
And we were able to actually not even have a conversation. It was like, literally, you said a sentence to me. I said a couple sentences to you, and it was done.
Yep.
I don't know. I think a lot of the time, I agree. I think the expectations are what can really alter our marriage. Like, I know for a lot of times, a lot of fights, a lot of resentment, anger for me was this expectation that I had, that I just created this thing in my head that things needed to be a certain way, or things were going to be this way, or you needed to do certain things without even like sharing with you these ideas or things that I needed or wanted. And like, I don't know, we'll say for a while, like, I wanted to take time for myself, and I expected you to like make me take time for myself, that it became this big thing. Like, you don't care about me, you don't love me, you don't care if I take care of myself. But in reality, it was like, it had nothing to do with you. And most of the time it is a you thing. It has nothing to do with them. It's just this story that you create in your head. Yeah. And it just can really really harm things.
Yeah, I agree. Stories. We could go very off the rails on stories, but let's not. I'm going to give you, you know me, I love to give like, okay, practically what the heck do we do about these things as often as possible? So I'm going to give something very practical in terms of expectations. And it's not so much in terms of letting go of the expectations, it's more like if you're really stuck on a situation where you think some changes need to be made in the way you think, or maybe like Locke actually needs to do more of blank. The best place to go to do that for both cases is gratitude. So one way, so if we take the dishes, you came home and you're like, I don't know why I'm so mad today about there being dishes in the sink. Yes, you had an expectation. Also, though, if you can take that as an instance in which you can find gratitude, like, hey, I haven't come home and found dishes in the sink for a while. I don't like it. It's kind of annoying, but finding these dishes made me realize how often I don't find dishes. You can then find gratitude in the situation, right? The flip side of that is, if you want me to change my behavior, I will tell you this, slightly off topic, but the best way to do that for anyone, man, woman, child, is praise. If you praise what you want, you'll get more of it. So when a child does something good, if you give them praise for that, they're going to want to do more of that. It's going to be more effective than if they do something bad and you shame them.
Well, see, that will piss a lot of women off. And you see a lot about that. You see this a lot on Instagram, is like, I shouldn't have to go out of my way and thank my husband every time he does something that I'm doing all day, every day, because he doesn't thank me for the things that I'm doing.
Right. So,
and so this is a big, you're going to get pushback on that from a lot of women. And this isn't like man versus women, but this is what I hear a lot of.
And I hear the same thing from men. So like, it's not man versus woman.
Yeah. It's like, well, I don't ever get thanks. Why should I thank her? And it goes back to the keeping score and the 50-50 and all of that. So,
so you want to hear my response?
Yeah, I have something to say after that.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I also want to feed into the standards versus expectation, because I can vouch for this, and this is a hard pill to swallow. So you said there's comments about like, well, I don't want my husband sitting on the couch drinking beer, I want him to help me. So like, if I didn't have expectations, that wouldn't happen. Mm-hmm. Well, also, a lot of women, I'm not saying all, I'm saying a lot of women are super controlling and have a certain way that they want to do.
You didn't do it right.
They want to do things and they want it done a certain way, and they don't allow the man to do it because it's not the right way, or they criticize it. So then why would he want to help if he's constantly being shamed and criticized? Yeah. And also, a second thing that I did a lot of is expecting him to help or do things without asking for his help. Mm-hmm. Or I would just get very mad and just passive aggressively mutter things under my breath and expect him to want to help me. There is a very easy way to work through this, and it's called, hey, honey, I'm really stressed out. I've been feeling really overwhelmed lately. Can you help me with some things around the house? Like, can maybe do the dishes, and can you vacuum, or can you like take the kids out for a couple hours just so I can get a break to myself? And I want to say more than 99.9% of the time, your husband is willing to do those things for you.
And then if he's not, that is a standards, not expectations problem. Mm-hmm. Then your standards, and I don't say this in a mean way, your standards were too low in selecting your husband, right? Yeah. Like if you got somebody who's not willing to help you out. Yeah, I agree. I want to go back to the I shouldn't have to, because you're going to get me all fired up with this one. I shouldn't have to fill in the blank. Yes, you should. Because that's taking 100% responsibility for your relationship. And you said something like the common complaint is, and I hear the same thing from guys a lot of times, and just different things that they're saying this about. I shouldn't have to thank my husband for doing things when he doesn't thank me for what I'm doing. That is the exact problem. You also want him to thank you, praise you for what you're doing. And it becomes, well, chicken or egg, which comes first? Who's going to be the bigger person to do it first? And then start that trend and lead in the relationship. Yeah, it probably should be your husband, but that doesn't mean that you can't be the one to start if you're the wife. I shouldn't have to, thank my wife for all the things she does around the house because she doesn't even recognize what I have to do at work all day. It's like, yeah, you should have to. If you want her to be the kind of wife who says, I'm so thankful for you providing for us, for you working so hard during the day, for you coming home after working your ass off all day long and still playing with the kids, putting them in bed, getting them ready for bed, cooking dinner, like whatever it is that he's doing. If you want that from your partner, yes, you should have to give it to them too. And if you can get in this taking 100% responsibility for your relationship mindset, you won't have a problem being the first one to do it. And I've seen you do this, and I've seen with praise and some of those exact words, like thanking me for the things I do. You don't even know what I'm doing, but you thank me for it sometimes. If I initiate that, I get more of it back. If you initiate that, I want to return the favor and thank you for something. So it's not I shouldn't have to, like that's a victim mentality.
Yeah.
You should have to. I shouldn't have to ask for what I want. Yes, you should. I shouldn't have to teach my kids manners. Yeah, you should. That's your job. I shouldn't have to anything, almost any one of these things I can tell you. Yes, you should have to. That being said, I understand the frustration and I understand the temptation to be like, I shouldn't have to. There are many things in our relationship where I feel like it would be really easy for me to fall into that. I shouldn't have to tell Ashley this or ask for, like, it's easy. I get it. When you do it, you got to own it. Like I'm not standing up here where we never pretend to have a perfect relationship. We still do this. We still have this I shouldn't have to in our vocabulary, but it shouldn't be there. It's dangerous. It's a trap. So that's another thing to let go of. I shouldn't have to. I got to take a breath.
Yeah, you just got all fired up.
You want to move on to another thing?
That's true, though. I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
I think this is like the last thing that I have is, you oftentimes hear parents complaining about their kids and like all of these behaviors or just stuff that they do. And almost always the kids' behaviors are mirroring whatever it is, like your habits, your emotions, the way that you're showing up, the environment that they live in. And that's hard. That's hard to be like, oh, my kid has been acting out, and like to figure out that it stems somewhere from either you or your husband or both. The way that your relationship is they could be mirroring something from that. And I also heard the same with relationship. You got to think you're in a marriage, in an intimate relationship for however long you are. You start to kind of become one. As hard as that is to swallow, you do start to become one. You pick up each other's habits. You pick up each other's emotions. You pick up each other's everything. And oftentimes when we're angry at our partner about something, almost always, and I really don't like always, but almost always it's something that irritates us about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's really hard when
you want to talk about something that'll get people all worked up. That's a statement that'll get people all worked up.
Oh, right, yeah, there. For sure. And it's so true. Like, I know that parents have a hard time like owning that with their kids. Like, no, it's my kids. My kids are the problem. How do I fix them? If they can't own that with their kids, they're not going to be able to own that in their marriage. Mm-hmm. Like you always, here I go again. People want to point a finger. They don't want to take ownership. They don't want to own a behavior or a pattern and be like, oh, you're right. Like, I have been doing this. And yeah, it does have something to do with me, whether you don't do the exact same thing that your partner does that annoys you. For some reason, there's something in you that makes you angry about it because it's in you in some way, in some form. Yeah,
like, or it used to be, or you've worked really hard to get rid of it, or, it was an issue in childhood.
Yes.
Or like, it's not just like, oh, you do the exact same thing. It's like, no, but maybe there's a tendency to do that and you've worked really hard to stop, or whatever it might be. So like a perfect example, and we don't have to beat this dead horse, but like socks being left on the ground drive you nuts, right?
It drives me nuts.
And so do you leave your socks on the ground? No. Well, you take them off in the middle of the night and throw them on the floor sometimes, but that doesn't count because you pick them up in the morning. So like you don't leave your socks everywhere.
No.
So why does it bother you so much? I don't do that. What do you're wrong, Ashley. I don't do that. It's like, okay, no, you don't exactly do that thing. But the reason that it's getting you so upset And we've had to get to go down a lot of layers to get to this. But to sum it up in a nutshell, you had a realization at one point where you came to me and you basically said something like, when the external world is out of my external world, meaning like the house is out of order, out of control, it's messy, it makes my internal world feel messy too. And so in that case, leaving socks on the floor is not necessarily something you do, but it is about you. Your reaction is about you, and not so much about the socks on the actual floor.
Yeah.
So I like this idea, and I was thinking about this idea for some reason, the word that came to my mind was selfishness. So if we're looking at things that we need to let go of, the word that came to my mind was selfishness, in terms of only seeing your perspective, only thinking about your own perspective, and not understanding that in a relationship there are two different perspectives. And that habit of seeing things in only your perspective, it's not conducive to a healthy relationship. If you're just focusing on the other person's annoying habits, or the way they trigger you, or the feelings that you don't agree with, instead of trying to see things from their perspective, instead of trying to understand where they might be coming from. It's a lot like what you were saying about the things that upset you in other people. If you just focus on being upset, that one perspective, you're not focusing on how you might be doing something similar, or why is this bothering me, or why are they doing that thing. I think it reminds me of, I don't know if it was last night or the night before, we were sitting at dinner talking to our kids, and a couple of them were talking about kind of going back and forth, frustrated with each other for not listening to their rules when they're in their room.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, you don't listen to the rules that I have for my stuff. And the response was, well, yeah, but that's because when you're in my room, you don't listen to the rules for my stuff. And if we look, it's easy for you and I to do, sitting there at the dinner table, hearing both sides, to be able to see both sides, but it's really hard for them.
Yeah.
They can only see their side. And in a relationship, that's dangerous, to only see your side.
Yeah, I think perception is huge. I mean, we heard on a podcast years ago a whole story about a husband that was waiting for his wife to meet him for dinner, and then like her car ended up breaking down, and then her cell phone died, and he tried to call her, and like the point is like he could have got really mad at her because he's like, the stories, we're getting to stories again that he's telling himself, and his perception is like, she's just blowing me off, she's not answering her phone, like she's inconsiderate, all of these things. And like here she is on the other side, probably scared, doesn't have a cell phone, tire broke down on the side of the road. There's all these things going through her head, and like they could have met up the next day and been really angry and had a fight over something if they could have just shared the story about their perception, and what happened was just really different. And I think that happens also often if you could just have a conversation. You think that you know what your partner is thinking, or I think we always think someone's out to get us, or, the worst case scenario. But if you had a discussion about it, it's really never ever what you perceive it to be.
Yeah. A silly little example of this, like, because that's kind of a big deal. Silly little example of this just came to my mind because before we were recording this, you were like, oh, hey, did you get my text message earlier? And like, I pulled up my phone and I'm like, I think you didn't send me one. And I guess you sent me a text message. I didn't receive it. Maybe you didn't have service when you sent it, but somehow it still hasn't sent. If you had only looked at it from your perspective, similar to your story you just told, you would have been like, oh, well, he got my message and didn't think I was important enough to respond, or whatever the story you're telling yourself. In reality, I never got the message.
Yeah.
So like, I wasn't ignoring you. I literally didn't get it. And you didn't know that until you brought it up.
Yes.
So
the power of conversation and actually communicating things, I think, is bigger than we all think. And I know communication is like communication, but I think that it really is a big deal, especially when it comes to perceiving the way other people think and feel about things. Because I think in almost every conversation we had where I actually was able to listen to your perception of something and get out of my own way and out of my own head, that it was like, oh, wow, I was thinking something totally different. Like,
yeah, I didn't understand.
Yeah. And like, it's that whole help me understand thing. Like, help me understand where you're coming from, I think is huge.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So that was a good list of things to let go of in your relationship. All things we learned the hard way that we need to let go of. It's usually how we learn things.
Yeah.
Screwing them up.
We're just trying to help you.
Yeah.
Not screw it up as much as us.
Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. Thanks for coming along on the journey on this one.
Thank you. Hi, friends. If you're enjoying the show, would you please leave a quick rating or review on Apple Podcasts for us? Doing this helps more people find the podcast, which means even more people can benefit from the conversations. We really appreciate you and your time, and thanks, as always, for listening.